Okay, so we're at 5:35. Let's get going. I'm confident people are still going to trickle in. We've got a large crowd today. It's probably one of our best attended Good Neighbor meetings, which we always appreciate. We appreciate neighborhood input. First you hear that noise, and that means one more person is showing up. But we have a zoning request. I got a few slides here I'd like to go through, and then I'll turn it over to the applicant, and then we'll go through a few Q&A. But this is the rezoning request that we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Just kind of what's the point of all of this? Really, just an opportunity for people to hear details of the application, allow the applicant to answer questions, hear feedback prior to it getting to the Planning Commission. It's never a good thing if somebody shows up to a planning commission and says, I'm just curious to see what's going on. We like to answer those questions prior to any formal consideration. With that being said, this is the very first step in the process. Planning Commission may consider this as early as 10/4/22. And I say may because, the applicant hears kind of what the feedback is and then kind of decides, yeah, I want to formally move forward or delay or change my application. There's a variety of things that could happen. Once the Planning Commission provides a recommendation, the City Council would consider the request at 3 separate public meetings, so there's plenty of opportunity for public input. We do value your public input, and we want you to voice your opinion. Just please note that if you want to be part of the public record, it needs to be in writing, and an email will suffice, and I will provide that to you in a minute. And so how does zoning work? Property has a zoning designation. It's been zoned ID Interim Development for quite some time. Interested parties may request to change zoning to allow other uses or smaller lots. Just a couple of ground rules, and we really don't have an issue with this here, but we do ask that you listen respectfully without interrupting. We would ask that you criticize ideas, not individuals, and give everybody the opportunity to speak. This didn't show up really well, but once the presentations are made, then we'll give the opportunity to allow people to speak. There's under reactions, you can go up there and kind of raise your hand. With such a large group, it's probably not going to work to have everybody asking and talking together. So I have the communications director of the City of North Liberty, Nick Burgess, here with me to help me because there's no way I'd be able to do this myself. I think our plan is when people raise hands, Nick's going to kind of call out 3, and when they speak, give the opportunity for a couple more, and we'll kind of see how that goes. Your position on this request is what it is. I respect that. However, if your position is I object to the development, I don't think there's a need to state it here. You are more than welcome to email me, and I'll incorporate your opinion into the public record. Tonight's challenge for you, and I would just say this is more a benefit for the applicant. Ask yourself, I would support this proposal if, and then finish that statement. And it may be nothing, it may be as is, but I would that's tonight's challenge, and I would ask you to be practical when you finish that sentence, if you're willing to do that. Here's my contact information. You can call me, you can email me. You shouldn't feel like you have to wait till the Planning Commission to talk or get an opinion. I'm happy to share any information that I have. Staff hasn't really provided a recommendation on this or gotten too far into it. Like I said, this is really the first step in the process. But please contact me if you have additional questions, and I've so far heard from quite a bit of you. So getting into the request. So if this is request is from ID Interim Development to RM8 PAD. It's a multi-unit residence planned area development, total acreage approximately 8.27 acres. Not all rezonings require a preliminary site plan. A PAD requires a preliminary site plan, which is tied to the approval if it is approved. If it is approved, minor adjustments are permitted, but overall the development must be consistent with the approved preliminary site plan. The reason I mention that is not all zonings have that. In fact, we just had a Good Neighbor meeting that didn't have a PAD and didn't have the site plan. So generally speaking, Somebody can't come in and say, well, I'm going to do this plan and then come up and do something completely different. And here is the preliminary site plan. Has a private street coming around, senior living facility that has 48 units, has 11 townhomes for 22 total units, and total number of units on the property is 70. Here's a rendering of what the senior living facility would look like. And here's a rendering of what the townhouses would look like. These would be kind of a duplex fashion. So, and it provided an aerial. So these last couple of slides are just for references. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corey Hodap and stop speaking.
Ryan, can you hear me?
Yep, but you're echoing a little bit for us, Corey.
All right, I'm sorry. My computer is not working right, so I'm kind of shooting from the hip on this one. I haven't heard any discussions that have been made, but I'm reading online here everything that's been going on. This is an active adult community, 55 and older. The building in the center is actually a multiple unit condos for each person, and then outside, like you explained, Ryan, that they're duplexes. Some of the renderings on the outside have changed to more of a modern look, little flatter roofs instead of the steep pitched roofs, but a majority of it is the same. And there'll be lots of screening, lots of green space. The building actually has underground parking, so everybody that's living in the center building will be parked underneath. And then the parking spots out in front of the building, which be towards Scales Bend Road, it's just, there's a row of parking stalls there for guests that come over or whatever it might be. There are a couple sets of parking stalls on the north side, which is the second, I guess, the entrance towards the north. That will be staff members that will be working in the facility and taking care of things. Other than that, there'll be a pool, there'll be pickleball courts, there'll be inside activities for everybody to do, even the people that are on the outside in the duplexes. They'll have an opportunity to use all the amenities that are offered in the complex. Other than that, that's really all I have. We do have some large trees that we're talking about screening Scales Bend off from the building and from the street side so that visibility won't be there as much. The height of the building, I guess we did take some pictures and some shots. The barn that's out there is actually taller than the building that we are proposing. Other than that, that's really, I guess, all I have for this site. So I'll turn this back over to Ryan.
Yeah, you mentioned it was a senior living facility, 55 plus. For people that don't know, could you describe what that is, what that means? Does everybody have to be over 55? What's the... Or did you catch that last question? Nick, I see Melissa Hodap, which is, I think, the phone Corey's on, raised hand, so you could let them speak.
Melissa, you should be able to unmute.
Yep.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I'm used to Zoom, not this. So I apologize. For some reason, Corey can hear, but he can't speak back into the meeting. So he came out. I'm on a separate computer just because we were having so many issues. We wanted a backup plan. You asked a question about 55 and older community. Yes, you do have to, when you establish that, you put it in the bylaws and the covenants that it is 55 and older. It can range all the way up. We do not want to do necessarily an assisted living or anything like that. It is more those that are transitioning out of their homes, want to still have a yard, but not a large yard. And then once you move into that center building, it's more of we don't really want a yard, but we want the amenities. We want the pool. We want the pickleball. We want the fitness center. We want an option to have meals through the facility, but we also do not have to. We are free to go do what we want. That is why there is underground parking. So it's like a condo, but a condo that is not going to have 18-year-old kids in there partying and having issues.
So do you envision it's not to the level of assisted care that Keystone would have? Is this just more of a retirement type? Okay.
It is, yes, correct. It is not that level of Keystone. It is not where they provide all the meals. It is, or the nursing staff, the assisted living. It is truly independent living where you just hit a point. You like I said, the duplex is around. You can still have your own yard. It's not a condo where there's an HOA and you're not allowed to plant or fence, that sort of thing. It is more of a, you do your own thing. And then once you're done with that, you can transition into a house. And that would be the step prior to Keystone. So, very, very low key. A lot of, I would call them snowbirds, people who love being in Iowa and have family still here, but have no desire to have a house to maintain, the higher taxes, the maintenance in the winter when they're not there. They can have a condo here and then leave in the winter and not worry about it because it's inside one building and then they can leave.
Okay, so I did, so somebody did ask, will all the units in the townhomes and the, I guess, multi-unit, those are all 55 plus, is that correct?
That is correct. And the outside units aren't actually townhouses. They are only duplex units. So it's 2 units per spot that you see on there. They look like H's on your plat. That's 2 units that go all the way around. The only reason we did that is we did not want high density backing up to those neighborhood homes. We are keeping the middle that is the higher density. Like Corey mentioned, it is not higher than the barn that is currently there. We are going to screen it as best we can. And out and around there, it is really just duplexes, and it will be 55 and older. There will be a restriction in the covenants that states that.
Okay, so Nick, I guess we will open it up to questions.
Yeah, we're going to start with Allison and Marco. I'm going to enable your Allison. Allison, you should be able to ask your question, and then Marco, you're next.
Hey, Nick. So my question is primarily about the height. You say it is shorter than the barn, but the barn also doesn't have windows. It doesn't have balconies. It doesn't have people that are standing on top of it and looking down into your yard. So I would just be curious what the developer has to say about that.
We have looked at that profile with the screening that we're talking about doing. It's not like you could see in someone else's name in your window from even the top floor. So that shouldn't be an issue at all.
But what about the illumination? I mean, looking at the facility, it looks like you have potentially, over 50 windows that could be lit up at night looking down into our neighborhood.
Well, all the windows, let's go back to the elevation of it. There we go.
Thank you.
All the windows will be, well, I guess there are some on the front face that could be reflective, I guess. But a majority
and I'm
of
specifically thinking of the ones that are going to be facing links.
links.
Which would be to the east, the back side of the subdivision towards those. So
Well,
everything is LED, and they've moved a lot towards that. So it's not bright and shining, but yes, there is the possibility of if everybody 55 and older was up at 10 o'clock at night on that top floor. with their lights on. However, traditionally, so we don't have the floor plan on here, and I apologize. We're still working with the architect, but the exterior units are traditionally the bedrooms, which have the windows, which would show out to you guys. Those wouldn't be lit up at night. The interior of the floor plan would have the living room and the dining room, those sort of things. And so that shouldn't be illuminated or cause a ton of an issue.
People don't turn on their bedroom lights at night?
No, I'm saying they do, but then when they go to bed, it's not something that's going to be on all night.
And I believe the distance away, I can't remember. I think it's from that side where the Loop Street is. I think you're 600 feet from this building. So that light should not transfer more. That shouldn't shadow past these duplexes.
Because you do have the pool and the fitness center and all of that buffering between you guys as well, over and above the duplexes.
Right. So as the duplexes are screening your guys' property, the reflection of light shouldn't transfer. I couldn't even imagine it transferring that far down there. I mean, you would have to have a really, really, really bright light, like a photocell light that is several thousands of lumens to be able to transfer light that far. Even a street light wouldn't even transfer light that far. So as far as reflective light disturbing the neighbors, it would be more likely to disturb the duplex before it even get across the duplex to your guys' back of your lot. So even on the north and south side, both situations, even across the road. The lights that we're putting on this, like Melissa said, are LED lights. They're all down lighting. So we'll have illuminations, but it will not be reflective at all. I thought you were more or less talking about the sun reflecting off the glass of the windows to your guys' place, but that shouldn't be an issue either. So I don't feel like that's a concern.
I would add from the city's perspective, if exterior lighting is a concern, we have requirements for when construction plans come in, and they have to show us where their lighting fixtures are going, what the photometrics are to ensure that it's not spilling over the property line.
All right, we've got Marco and then Melanie, you're next.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having this meeting. I was just curious. So, are all units going to be lease only, or are they sold? I'm mostly curious about the duplexes, and if they're sold upon resale, the 55 plus will still be enforced. Can they bring their grandson to live with them? How does that all work?
So we haven't really determined if we're going to sell off the duplexes. More than likely, we're probably going to keep that as part of the community. As far as it's not like an association, but it's a community that we're building here. So everything that is shown there will be owned and managed by the business side of this. Okay, so each person will come in and they'll either rent the unit and pay dues to the association, which we set up for the condominium building. So everything will be kind of integrated, interconnected in that aspect. If we were to sell it, the duplexes off on the outside, each one of those would have a, what do I want to say, Melissa? Like a restrictive.
So yes, I can speak on this. Have you ever heard of a co-op, for example, where potentially you can sell your rights to it? That's what Corey was talking about in the beginning, where if it stayed part of this, it would be more of a co-op. You own part of it, but then when you go to sell, you still have to have the strict guidelines and regulations. If you sold the duplexes off, it would still be a title restriction of a 55 and older community. So in aspects, what you're requesting is information whether, like, let's just say somebody's 15-year-old nephew could move in. There is short-term allowances for that. But usually, traditionally, if it's over 2 weeks, it is not allowed. So they could not permanently move in there, establish residency, and potentially go to a school district that's, go to Grant or North Central. They could not move in and establish this as their home. That would be restricted.
I believe the most recent example we've had in town that's been a co-op is the Vintage Estates. It is on the west side of Jones Boulevard. probably about midway between Penn and Forever Green.
Correct,
And
very
that is,
similar to that.
All right, we've got Melanie and then Lisa after that. Melanie, you can unmute and go ahead. All right, let's go to Lisa and Melanie. We'll come back to you if after this.
Has there been any study? Is something like this even needed in the community? I mean, do we need 55 and older housing?
This is Ryan from the city. I mean, I can speak in general terms. Generally, aging community is something that all communities are dealing with. We do have an aging population. I do think there's a need in the community for homes for people that are aging, particularly with mobility issues and things like that. There hasn't been a study specifically that identified that this piece of property or that the city specifically has a need for this number of units. That's typically not what we do as a city. But I can tell you, generally speaking, all communities pretty much are seeing a need for housing that allow aging in place.
Okay. Why, of all the property that's around North Liberty, did you choose this one?
So when we identified this piece of property, we looked at it. We've actually known about it for a long time, trying to figure out what we could do with it and retain the building on the site. But it just wasn't, we could not make anything work with it. But we love the site for a 55 and older community because it's that hometown feel. We felt that it would fit very well there, and the people that would live there would love it just because of the walking trails and the ponds that are around it, and being able to be close to the city yet without living in the city. A lot of times these places are right dead smack in the middle of the city, and the seniors don't really care for that. Obviously, this isn't going to be a loud community or a loud development. It's going to be very quiet, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity for walking, the seniors to get out and walk around and obviously meet new people and have people over and visit the community or visit the site. So we're drawn to it with a lot of different aspects of why we wanted to have it there. We felt it was a good fit, and I thought it would fit very nice there. So that's where. Okay.
This might be a little more for Ryan to answer. Do you have plans to do something with Scales Bend? I mean, I don't have any kids in school, but I worry about the kids trying to get across the road to get to school because of the way people up the road, the Jolly Roger area, come flying through, all the traffic in the summer with the boats and the campers. And if we've got an older community trying to pull out or in to their neighborhood off that road, it's pretty risky. The crossing the road, I think, is even a challenge. There's some people who are nice and will stop if they see anybody at the intersection wanting to cross, and there's some who just fly through. So, I mean, it's not the safest road to be crossing, especially if you're an older adult.
So, and this is Ryan again. So we've heard Scales Bend road safety concerns a number of times. Obviously with the pandemic, people were driving less, but we recently did ask our regional planning organization to take another look at Scales Bend, see if it would warrant a speed decrease. And their findings were that it did not warrant a speed decrease. So I'm happy to share those findings. We do kind of base, the location of stop signs and speed increases and decreases. There has to be what we call a warrant analysis. We did recently do that, and they found that there was no warrant to decrease the traffic. So they found that it wasn't a safety concern. I don't mean to imply whatsoever that people aren't flying up and down that road. It does happen. But just, I'm happy to share that information that we've received.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go back to Melanie, and then I've got Jack, Z, and Jeff. Melanie, are you there? All right, let's go to Zach, then Jeff, then Ethan. Jack, go ahead. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, so this is Jack's wife, Kelly. I had a question regarding the increased traffic flow and how you propose, we're going to support that kind of traffic at the intersection in the morning, with 55 units or, 70 total units. What's the proposal there with that intersection?
This is Corey. Again, this is an adult active community, which I understand the flow issues with traffic. But at that intersection down there, that's mainly in the morning. Towards 9, 10 o'clock in mid-morning, the traffic dies down a lot. These particular people, 55 and older people, are going into their retirement, so they're not going to be traveling at the same times that everybody's rushing out of their house to get the kids to school and this, that, and the other. But I do understand your concern about the traffic getting congested in that intersection. But I really feel that it's not going to affect having these type of people there because, again, they work and, they're not on the same schedule as all of us that are rushing to work and taking kids to school. So as far as traffic flow goes, I really don't think this will impact that.
And again, this is just an initial meeting, a neighborhood meeting. We still have to go through planning and zoning as well as city council. And that is all issues that are brought up. They do a traffic impact study and they do all of that. We would definitely ensure whatever we need to make sure that, there will be some added traffic. Yes, there will still be some that want to get up and go do their thing first thing in the morning, early risers. Some might. We can't guess that. However, traditionally, based off our studies, it is not early morning and it's not, that 5 o'clock traffic that you would see an impact.
Kelly, we're going to go to Jeff, then Ethan, then I've got Crystal.
All right, thanks, Nick. I actually have two questions. First of all, is there a property management entity, and is that entity on site? And the second question is just regarding the whole plan. One of the criticisms that I've heard from some of my neighborhoods or neighbors is that this plan just does not match the aesthetic of the existing neighborhood. So what was, the thought behind let's put a 4-story building in amongst all of these single resident family homes? Those are my questions.
Thank you. So yes, there will be somebody at least on site to handle anything that would happen overnight. We have not established the property management for it. That would take partnering with a couple people that we are vetting for that. Why did it come to this? Well, quite frankly, originally it was discussed purchasing it and leaving the barn and leaving the facility, but the dollar amount that is requested for this doesn't justify it. And we hit a point we were going to put single family in. Again, it didn't justify it. And quite frankly, we've had conversations with people who even are on city staff, I'm not going to mention them, but have said they wish there was a place that you could just transition out of. I do a lot of dealings like farmers, that sort of thing. And it's very hard to, when you hit a point and you need to downsize, you have to go into a tiny little condo. And part of that is competition in the market. You're going into a condo where you're competing with maybe a young couple, and they're willing to, the market's been crazy. I know it has slowed down, but the market's been crazy. So part of this was making a community where it is restricted to people you want to live around, a community you want to have. And again, aesthetics, no, this necessarily is not part of Fox Run, but because it is such a quiet community and it's walkable, close to town, but not in town, like Corey had mentioned, it is something where we, in multiple conversations, it has come up, that would be a great piece for this. And not stuck, like Corey said, right in the middle of town or outside of town where you don't have access to amenities if you need to, you know, make a quick run.
I'd also like to add too, as far as fitting in, yes, the multi-story building is, you know, a higher density building, but we're trying to screen that with the duplexes around it. The elevations and renderings really don't do it any justice for what you see right now, but what we have proposed, I mean, some of the colors are changing and just small details on the buildings. And then, like we said, we're talking about possibly doing more shallower pitched roofs to blend in with the existing housing around, because there's a lot of ranches around the property. So we're talking about doing something like that. But color schemes are going to be muted earth tones, nothing bold, bright that's going to stand out. And then with the screening that we're proposing, we're spending a fortune on it, but it's going to look very, very nice and help dress the whole area up through there.
Okay, Melanie emailed me, so I'm going to ask Melanie's question. She wrote, if these units cannot be sold or rented for 55 plus, will the change in use, basically, can that be changed and rented to younger? I would say that we could list this as a 55 plus community as it's stated on this plan. This plan is appended to the zoning. And so if they came back and said, hey, Ryan, we want to do market rate apartments, they'd have to go back through the rezoning process entirely. The second question is, what do you anticipate the price range for these units in town, the duplexes, to be?
Honestly, we can't say right now. The market is so volatile as far as supply and demand. We have built a house that went up $50,000 from last year. Exact same floor plan, can't control it. Also, price of ground. You go to put the infrastructure in, pipe might go up $70,000. So as of now, with this being preliminarily just a neighbor meeting, I don't know that we can really even estimate. They're not going to be low end. They're not going to be, 175, 200,000.
There'll be right around the four range is what we're predicting. So 375, 400,000, and then increasing from there with all the add-ons.
The condos would be different, but having the amenities of the pool and the facility, it's something that they're not going to be low end at all. And we will have options, clearly, because you want people to be able to afford things in retirement. However, we do have to factor everything in, and this could take a few more months to get through. And like I said, piping, concrete, and everything could change before then.
I think you may have touched on this, but the last one was, how did you determine that there was a need for senior living facilities like this? Comment was that there seemed to be a few in town and around the corridor area. So how did you determine?
So to be 100% honest, I apologize, Ryan. Sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead. I was finished.
To be 100% honest, we've looked at a couple different facilities. We looked over in Saddleback, where Hodge and them are now building on the front. We've looked at Dubuque. We've looked at Guttenberg. Sorry, Guttenberg, not Dubuque. I apologize. Guttenberg. It has kind of been one thing that we have been looking about doing. We have parents and family members that are all hitting this point, and quite frankly, are not going to go into a condo. And a lot of the options are all condos. So if they want to transition into something and then into the condo, that's fine. But it hit a point with just lots of conversations and what we've done that there needs to be a transition piece. And this piece in particular, I'll be honest, we looked at it originally to maybe put all of our equipment on and run as a shop. You guys would not have liked that. We would have had equipment in and out of there nonstop. It would have matched the farming, trucks nonstop, that kind of thing. That would have been a lot of extra traffic on Scales Bend. And that is when Corey said, what if we did something different with it? What if we did what we've been talking about for probably 5 years now? We have a guy that we know, Mark. He does senior housing for a living, and he's done studies for us. And he was one that we reached out to and said, what do you think? So we've done the research. We've thought about it. We just kind of came to it would be a good transition, and we thought it would fit the neighborhood better than running a development and construction company out of the site.
All right, I've got Ethan, then we've got Crystal, Hankins, Jack, which I believe is actually Kelly, Marco, Brady, and then Sloan. So let's start with Ethan. Go ahead. You should be able to unmute. Ethan, are you there? You should be able to unmute to ask your question. All right, we'll come back to you, Ethan. Crystal, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, hi, thank you. So my question is mainly in regards to the northern section of this development. My house backs up along to the northern portion of this property. So I'm confused as to what that blue area is towards the north there. If that's, I think it's just a water retention area, but it's right darn in my backyard. So I'm just curious what that is a picture of. So if you can speak to that. And then my other question, I'm not sure, this probably isn't the right meeting for it, but I'm going to throw it out there just in case you do have the answer. I'm wondering if there is any information as far as if this kind of a development is going to increase the general city's tax base overall. And then if there's an anticipation that this would negatively impact our property values if it remains more of a rental as opposed to something that you purchase.
I'm going to answer a few from the city's perspective. We're not offering any tax incentives on this, so generally speaking, it would, it would generate more money in taxes for the city and schools if it were redeveloped. But we haven't offered any incentives or anything like that that would lower that. So, secondly, the blue area that you see, blue areas that you see on the plan are for anticipated stormwater detention. Utilities were stubbed to this property, anticipating, I think, that it would be redeveloped. And so there is storm sewer to convey stormwater at the east end of the property and the north end. And there's also sanitary sewer stubbed there as well. I feel like there was one more question, and I think I only got two.
That was regarding affecting their property values, rent versus sell.
I can't. I got to be really careful with this and say that there are certified appraisers out there that do this kind of work. I am not one of those. What I can tell you is we have situations where you have kind of townhomes and duplexes next to single family, and I think they function just fine. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that one.
No, I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. And then one more thing, and then I'll let the next person ask, okay? How close to the property line are those duplexes along the edge?
I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I apologize.
don't-
We're on my laptop. I can't zoom in.
I'm gonna guess I don't even know.
I think it was like 50. I think it was like 50 feet plus.
Let me go get him. Let me go get this site.
He's going to go grab the actual site plan. Really, I apologize. We were having technical difficulties. So we're on my laptop now versus his sound just wasn't working. So he's going to go grab the plat map quick.
I can open it up too on my computer. There's a 50-foot setback shown to the east property line. They do show some decks. Let's see, number 7 is deck for townhomes being 10 feet deep, 18 feet wide. So to the edge of the deck would be proposed 40 feet to the east property line. Along the north property line, the deck would be, this looks like 69 feet. And then along the south, 50-foot setback with a 10-foot deck encroachment.
All right. Ethan, we're gonna come back to you. If you can unmute, you can ask your question. Your microphone should be enabled. All right, let's move to Hankins. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
All right, this is Holly. I should have put my first name on there. I have 2 questions. The first one is there a timeline where a decision would be made on whether the units, I'm hopefully understanding it correctly, that the duplexes are maybe up to be determined whether they'll be leased units or if they'll be sold units. But if you could clarify if the condos will be sold at all, or if it's all being discussed and maybe what point that decision is made, if that goes before the city. Because I think that support may depend on whether it's more of a business or more of a community, or if it's people ownership buying into it, that type of thing. And then my only other question is, and I say only, I shouldn't say that. The other question is if there is because it's a 55 community, and it gets approved and the structures all go up, and if there is a lack of interest or lack of leasing, can the type change? I know we talked about before that if the type changed before it was approved with the city, but can it change, say that we maybe don't have the driving force that we thought we might for that type of community? Can that change after the fact?
Okay, so to answer your first question, we typically do not, from a zoning perspective, regulate if a dwelling unit is leased or owner occupied. That's citywide. That would be more handled through the co-op. If this were approved and this as a 55 plus unit and this preliminary site plan is appended to the zoning, and then they came back later and said, no, we want this to be all market rate apartments, they'd have to go back through this process entirely again, back to the rezoning process. So this plan becomes part of the zoning.
And just so you guys know, I don't know that we adequately explained what our thought process is. By owning, yes, it would mean we would sell them off. There would be essentially an HOA to cover everything. Our option as far as renting isn't really renting. They would be buying ownership into a co-op. So it would not be necessarily they're renting from us with a management company. It would be one entire entity where they buy into it, and it's essentially an ownership share. But and co-ops can be very confusing. We do not want to get into essentially property management. It would be where we want them vested as owners, because when you have such facilities as a workout room, a pool, things like that, when you have ownership stake in it, you have a tendency to care for it more. So our thing would be, we want them to have ownership in it, but a co-op is different than them just buying it and you can do whatever you want. We have not decided if it would be sell them off or create a co-op. That is kind of where we stand right now, because there are a lot of gray areas that we're not experts on. And so we're relying on the experts to guide us with what would be the best way. And right now we are just a preliminary plan. So we would have to get through P&Z and then determine, okay, this is our plan. This is the best case scenario. Either way, it would be ownership into it.
Thank you for clarifying. I think that's where maybe misunderstood it when you were saying it, because I was thinking more it would be like more of a business management thing under the heading of the development versus the co. I think Oak Knoll is probably like a similar type where it is an ownership into the co-op and you have ownership, and I think that would be a concern for the residents as well, because I think we feel the same. There is a different vested interest when you own it versus rent it. So thank you for clarifying on that.
Absolutely agree.
All right, we're gonna go back to Ethan. If you can unmute, you're good to go. All right, we're gonna move to it's still labeled Jack Z, but I believe that's Kelly. Then we'll go Marco and then Sloan.
It's actually Jack this time. Sorry. Just to follow up on the stormwater piece that was discussed earlier, how would this integrate, hopefully enhance the existing stormwater plan, which is, our drainage is fairly inadequate out here in certain areas. So I'd like to get a little bit more detail on where the additional outlets will be and how this will enhance the storm drain or storm management.
Yeah, so if you, let me go back to my aerial here. I mean, the east side of Fox Run, it was the original part of Fox Run. I don't know if any of it, if much, has stormwater detention as we require it now. So I think some of these lots may drain onto this property, so the property has to accept that into its stormwater pond. It requires to hold that stormwater and then release it at a certain rate. Now I'm talking, I know below an engineer's level, but we look at stormwater calculations to determine like how much pervious surface, kind of these release rates. So we think from a water quality standpoint, it will improve. And it just depends on the storm event.
Okay, well,
hopefully I've answered that question in generalities, and I've got to answer it in generalities at this point, but there's a storm inlet pipe at the north end of the property and the east end of the property that was stubbed into the property. We have to speak in generalities at this time just because the city engineer hasn't looked at any stormwater, they haven't produced any storm calculations. I can tell you the initial comment that we provided to them, we looked at the site plan and provided some initial feedback of some that we wanted to address, and we feel as depicted, the stormwater ponds look a little small to us. We kind of feel that they're going to have to be much larger, but that's more based on a science than it is just on a desire.
Right. So yeah, because and on the east side there is basically the one outlet, and that is not adequate at this point.
So that's what part of the stormwater calculations take into account. What is the size of that, structure? And then the stormwater pond has to be designed in such a way that it's releasing water at a rate that pipe, along with all the other stormwater coming into that pipe, it can withstand at a certain storm event.
Yep. Understood. Thank you.
I'd like to say one quick thing, Ryan. Again, these basins that we're talking for stormwater management to solar release, these will be dry basins. They're not like they're going to be holding water or anything like that. So, and we'll be landscaping them, so it's not going to look like just a weedy mess back there. So we're going to take care of them and maintain them so they look decent. I think that was one other person's question too. So just wanted to speak on that behalf.
All right, we've got Marco, then Sloan, then Allison. Go ahead, Marco, and unmute and ask your question.
All right, thanks, Nick. I'm curious about timeline for construction specifically. What would be a realistic estimate of timeline for construction from ground break to completion, at least the major outside construction, and with all of the the planning and the zoning meetings that have to take place till when would that be more or less hoped for to start? And lastly, would road closure be required at all during construction? Thank you.
Okay, Ryan, I might have to refer to you on a timeline going through the city, but as far as a breaking ground type process, I wouldn't even be able to tell you how long the construction is going to take. Something like this usually takes 4 or 5 months just to get the groundwork stuff done, and then going into the vertical construction side of it, it's going to take over a year just to get the facility built. The duplexes may go at the same time around the perimeter of the property, so those will be probably latter part of 2024, I'm guessing, or the beginning of 24, something like that, before the units will be ready to be occupied. But as it starts, as of today, we still have to get through P&Z and council. So there's a couple meetings apiece before we can even get to council. And then once we do get through council, we'll start doing our due diligence on trying to figure out the cost and timelines. And there's a lot that goes into these as far as trying to figure out a timeline, especially with today's economy. So Ryan, if you want to speak on behalf of planning and zoning timelines or council.
Yep. So assuming this goes to planning commission on October 4th, it would be first reading at city council on October 18th. Second reading would be November 8th. And the third and final reading would be November 22nd. So city council has to vote yes on all three of those votes in order for it to pass. The planning commission provides a recommendation to the city council, so that's their voting capacity. Typically, after something like that, we would start to review construction plans, and there's several rounds of submittals and comments from the city until we feel comfortable that they meet all of city codes. So assuming that something like that would happen during the winter time, you would anticipate that they would be begin to do earthwork and installation of utilities, in the construction season of next year. But it just sometimes depends on what their time frame is as well. That's probably the fastest it could go. As far as road closures, I wouldn't anticipate Scales Bend having to be closed. There may be, we will have a traffic control plan as part of the review of the construction plan. So, as they're pouring the private entrances in there, there'll have to be obviously some, space for workers to be safe. And there's an existing driveway entrance on there that needs to be restored. But I don't anticipate a full closure of the road. That's not typical.
Okay, thank you.
I did get an email from Ethan. He asked if the apartment building would have an elevator. I believe it will. Just for accessibility purposes, but Corey and Melissa, could you clarify that?
Yes, the condo units that we're talking about building will have probably 2, if not 3 elevators in it, just to keep it. I can't remember the requirement it is, how far or what the distance is from the elevator. So I would say a minimum of 2 elevators.
The next one was that Ethan mentioned, I get the sense that you applied the 55+ community model in seeking the PAD approval on this request. I can tell you I have conversations with applicants all the time, and I recommended that this be part of the PAD just from the sense of coming in on this property. I have no idea how this is going to turn out at all, honestly. But I do know just coming in with an RM8 that allows for a variety of uses like duplex, townhomes, apartments, had no chance whatsoever of just going in. So I recommended that they apply the PAD to this because it would have site plan that compelled them to develop in a manner consistent with that. And I think there was a question about the main building setbacks. I get about 150 feet to that front property line. I get I think about, and I'm just adding numbers together here, about 250 feet kind of to the bump out, not to the main building, but just to give you an idea what those setbacks are to property lines. And I think that covers Ethan.
All right, we've got Sloan, Allison, and then Jan and Jim, and then Megan, and then Brady. Go ahead, Sloan.
Thank you. There was some irony, I think, maybe in Corey mentioning the hometown feel of our neighborhood. The farm is totally central to the hometown feel. So, you know, your proposal eliminates what absolutely makes our neighborhood a hometown feel. That was just comment number one. Comment number two, you also mentioned our quiet community, but, you know, if you add hundreds of more residents to our small little Fox Run neighborhood and a large outdoor pool, that probably destroys the quiet community feel. And I understand that you represent, you know, your residents, but everybody around your property will have, you know, destroyed community feel so that you can have, you know, what you're describing. So that's not really ideal for us. And then I guess I have two questions, and maybe these are more for Ryan, but why is the builder speaking like it's already their property to develop? That threat of running equipment and how we wouldn't like that, so this is better. That seemed really beyond where we are at this point. So maybe just speak to that. You know, do we still have a voice in this, or is this builder just giving us their best of the worst idea? And then number two, Ryan, is it common to put high density housing surrounded on all four sides with RS4 single family homes, you know, right in the middle of it? And then what message do you feel like that gives to everyone else that lives in North Liberty in a subdivision, that the city might just change the zoning and put an apartment building in your backyard?
Well, I can't really speak to what the developer, you know, I can't really put words in their mouths. I can tell you that this is not a done deal from the city's perspective at all. And so we're very early on in this process. And so, I'll leave it at that. I'll tell you that the biggest challenge that I have seen in my 25 plus planning career is the last piece of the puzzle, or the near last piece of the puzzle. They're never easy, and you know, we haven't made a determination of what's appropriate. I can tell you this area is unique because Scales Bend acts like a collector road. It's designated as a collector road, which is it's a higher travel road, but not quite to the level of like a Forever Green or a Ranchaw Way or a Penn. And so you are fitting something kind of what I believe is in the middle of a neighborhood on the east and west side of Scales Bend Road. And so I think from the city's perspective, we're looking at, is there a possibility for a development to be compatible with the established character of neighborhood? And we're not ready to make to tell you what that determination is at this point, because I think that there's a possibility the application could change. It may not. I don't know.
Could I press you on that a little bit and just ask if you've ever put a high density apartment building in the middle of a subdivision in North Liberty?
The pause is because I'm thinking. Well, I've been here for 2.5 years, Sloan, so the limited experience I've had, I don't believe we have. It's probably been more of a townhome type development. But you know, the more recent higher density stuff that was approved was over by Tin Roost, and then the new development going in just west of Jones Boulevard. That's some of the higher density development. I would add, and I think Corey and Melissa touched on this, and this isn't meant to compel any type of thought. It's just, it is what it is, right? There's kind of a couple of elements that go into the development of property. One is the land cost itself. It's debatable of whether this is too high or not. A lot of people would argue that it is. There's the cost of demolition for the existing structures that are on the land. And then there's the cost for physical improvements. And you add all those things up together, and then you as a developer, really in the market and this type of industry to make a profit. You may not care if they make it a profit, but that's kind of how I think they come to this determination of what they think could work from a development standpoint. Over the past 2.5 years, I've heard a lot of interesting requests for this property. I think it's ranged from youth athletic fields to putting a business in the barn. I just didn't think that was in, can I develop half of the property? Those things just didn't go anywhere, I think, because they were a challenge to put all those things together and make it work. So I'm going to leave it at that.
All right, Allison, you're next. Then I've got Jim and Jan, Megan, Brady, and Susan.
Thanks, Nick.
Allison?
So I have 2 questions. So my first question is primarily around the water retention areas. If those do fill up, I don't know much about, water retention, but could there be the potential for like a waterfowl problem, where there's, an influx of geese or ducks or, animals coming in, that aren't there right now? I mean, right now we obviously have deer and foxes and stuff, but we definitely don't have geese in our backyard. And then my second comment, so Sloan, I agree with you that I thought that the mention of putting, trucking equipment back there was very threatening. But I also want to say that, given that the closest zoning that's similar to this is in Cedar Springs, and it's simply like a row of 4, 2-story townhomes, it's not as dense as this. Melissa, you said that you said yourself at the beginning of this call that seniors don't want to move into condos, and yet you're building condos. So I guess my question is, why not build, more townhomes, that they seem to want, versus, a 48-unit condo building?
It's twofold. They want to go into something like a duplex or a townhouse, and then they can't. Then they go into the next phase, which is the condos, and then they go into something that's like Keystone, full assisted living. There's nurses on staff. There is, meals provided, that sort of thing. It's a transitional. It's not. I mean, I know a lot of people that are 70 and still nowhere close to needing to go into a place like Keystone, even older than that. So it's a transition. It's not meant to be for everybody. And I don't know one person that wants to go from owning their own space per se, like a single family house with my own yard, I'd get to do my own gardening, I get to do my own thing, to I'm going to get thrown into a condo, townhouse style, that there's an HOA and I can't put a fence up, I can't put a garden in, I can't do a lot of that stuff. I don't know if you've ever lived in a townhouse condo, but that's a lot of times the restrictions. You can't do anything in your own backyard. And so this is the transition from, we're going from a single family to potentially something where I still own my backyard and I can do something, into, okay, now I'm going into that condo.
So I would push back a little bit on that and say the age range for this is 55. Retirement ages are getting later and later. What's to prevent active 55-year-olds who are still working adults from moving into a facility like this just because they're simply downsizing, versus, like you said, the people who are retiring, moving into the townhomes and then transitioning into the condos before they would transition into assisted living? What's to prevent, a bunch of very, still very active, because I would consider 55 young, people from moving into the facility?
Oh, there's nothing against that. I'm not against that at all. We don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's why having pickleball, I know it was mentioned about the pool, but it's not a pool that's going to be open to the public where there's slides and kids and all that. So I don't know how that would be disruptive. It's going to be where they can still hang out with a lot of people they know, but have their own space. I'm not saying that not everybody is going to be retired. I'm not saying that they're just going to sit in their house all day. We don't want that. It's called an active 55 and older community. You want people to still have fun, have friends, have things to do. And I'm not generalizing at 55. It's just that's tradition. There's some that are 65 and older. We just did that because I know a lot of people that they're not retiring because you can't anymore with a lot of the restrictions and things as far as stipends and things like that. You can't. So you might work part-time. Well, there's nothing wrong with working, 20 hours a week, but still enjoying your life.
I'm more or less thinking about the increase in traffic. If it is a lot of, older adults who are still actively working and the influx of cars coming in and out of there during the day, because none of them are truly retired.
I'll let Ryan speak on that one. But again, to reiterate what Ryan said earlier, there will be traffic studies done. We will be taking everything into consideration as far as congestions and traffic flow on Scales Bend Road. Speaking on your previous question, it was discussed about the geese flying into these detention basins. Again, these are wet basins when it rains, and then it's released out relatively fast. So these will be dry basins, except when there's a massive amount of rain, it'll fill up and then discharge at a slower rate. And I believe that was the last question you asked. So I'm going to turn that over to Ryan if he wants to speak on the traffic.
So the typical traffic generation rate you'd use for a single family home is 9.55 daily car trips a day. That means spread out through the day. So that's the average that a house will generate, 9.55. Apartments tend to be less, but assuming it were 9.55 spread over 70 units, that equates to 668.5 car trips spread throughout the day on Scales Bend. So I would caution people from saying Scales Bend can't handle that much, because I don't know the answer to that if it can. I suspect that Scales Bend can handle that capacity, but I don't know for sure. And I think a lot of people, when they hear that number, are thinking all of these people are coming out of the property at once, or they're all coming in at once, and that's just not the case. I mean, there's Fox Run is one of our larger subdivisions, and I know you can get in and out in a couple different ways, but all the people don't come in at once. It's a little busier in the morning, I know, especially during school drop off and school pickup, but then they tend to be spread out throughout the day.
And will those traffic studies include the development that's being done on, I believe it's called the Buck Moon Villas?
I can't be committal at this point to, I don't know that we've made a determination that typically with a study, the city takes a look at the overall impact of the development and then makes a determination of if a traffic study is warranted. I'm not sure that we're going to make that determination. Like for instance, the proposed development at the northeast corner of Penn and Jones Boulevard as extended up to 240th. That was an 80-acre property. It had commercial development along the front, had multifamily in the middle, and had single family to the north. And so the determination was made for a large scale development like that, a traffic impact study. So I can't say from the city's perspective that one would be required. If it were, typically, yes, you're including background traffic in the analysis that's done by a professional transportation engineer. They take data on how much traffic is coming out on that road and take into account kind of future growth and those types of projections and other type of development.
Sure. And during the construction phase, what kind of vetting is done on the construction companies that would prevent, I would assume this is going to be, a year long or more construction process. So that's a lot of construction workers that are going to be hanging around our neighborhood on a consistent basis. I just want to make sure that the people, if this construction goes through, that are coming in and being in our backyards for a while are people that are vetted and safe.
So we have, okay, sorry, I can speak to that. We have only
Oh,
ever
go
used,
ahead, please. Yep,
yeah,
I'm not-
we have
go
only
ahead.
ever used local contractors as far as, you know, Streb Concrete, who just used it for excavating, Maxwell Excavate, yeah. So everybody that we've ever used, and we've done other subdivisions. Solon, we're completing a 5th phase of a subdivision. We've built in North Liberty. Actually, half of Deerfield was done by CJ's Construction. So we've been around for a very long time and always used local contractors.
Yeah.
That's nice that you're using local, but I'm wondering about if the construction workers that are coming in are background checked and vetted.
We can't control that. We hire the subcontractor. They do their own vetting.
All right. We're going to go to Jim and Jan. Then we've got Megan, Brady, Susan, and Chris. Thank you, folks. I know we're at 6:45. Thanks, everybody, for the patience. Go ahead, Jim and Jan. All right. Let's, Jim or Jan, you should be able to unmute. Let's go to Megan.
Now,
Oh,
is it
there we go.
better? My question right away is this property already bought and owned by this developer?
The property, we do have under contract. We do not own it yet.
You're in the process, because as a couple other people said, we noticed a threat about you're just going to use it for construction site if we don't all say, oh, you be.
That's what
So
That was, I apologize. I don't mean, that was not meant as a threat. Somebody
no, we
said,
heard it. We heard it. But
somebody,
so that was my question, is whether you owned it or not yet. So that's my only question. Thank you.
okay, so I want to say I didn't mean that as a threat. What I meant was somebody asked what brought you to this property. And originally it was the barns and the facilities, and it was all of the things that we could potentially use. And so we looked at it and we thought about relocating our business there. And we decided it wasn't the best use. Every time you look at a property, you decide its best use, and that wasn't its best use, and it didn't fit the neighborhood. So it wasn't meant to be a threat. I apologize.
All right. Thank you.
Megan, you're next. Then we've got Brady, Susan, Chris, and Molly.
Hi there. My question, actually, there's 2 questions. One centers around the timeline that this proposed construction would occur, and in comparison to construction happening on the other side of the development in Buck Moon or Liberty Villas. I would have a super major concern that the construction of both of those is happening at the same time, both for traffic, potential closures or lane reductions, dust that is produced, sound that is produced, and would not want to see those occurring at the same time. I think that's a huge disruption for the quote neighborhood feel that you've described. And then my second question, I'm wondering why, as a business, as a developer, you would embark upon doing a 55+ community without doing a market study to know that the market would hold that type of interest in a community that the average age is quite young in comparison to other locations.
We have done a study. That's where I mentioned Mark, who we know who does senior housing. I think Ryan said the city has not actually done a study, but we have looked into it, and that's the only reason, because it's a huge risk. It's a huge business venture. It's a huge risk. So no, I would never go into that without a study, and it is a need in the area, and that is, yes, it is a younger community, but in certain areas, there are a lot of people aging out of their homes. Even in Fox Run, that subdivision has been around for a long time. There's a lot of those houses that those people are ready to transition out. And there's not a lot of options unless Like I said, you want to go to a townhouse or a condo.
And to that.
So what did the market study show that you did? So if you said you've done it, did it prove that a 55 plus community is needed in North Liberty?
Yes. So there's actually multiple, because it took into account that there's already Keystone, and would that be competition? And that's why we opted not to do the level they are doing, because there isn't necessarily another need for a full, I guess you would say, assisted living. It's more transitional 55 and older. It's not needed per se for the full facilities of a retirement or assisted living. But yes, there is a need as far as the demographic, and the demographic does not just include the city proper. It includes the farms around, and for example, Tiffin doesn't have anything like this. It includes the surrounding areas.
Okay, thank you for addressing that question. Then the first question I had was in relation to construction of two projects that are adjacent to this neighborhood on both sides happening at the same time, and the concerns with noise, with traffic, with lane reduction, with dust. Has that been considered? And if not, why?
I think the biggest challenge we have here, and is our construction season is limited, and there's just nothing we can do about that. And so you have a construction season about, is it March, April? It depends, and it goes to October, maybe November, if you're really lucky, in December. I only mention that because if you delay a project, you potentially say, okay, you can't construct till next year. So we do take into account if there's a couple of adjacent developments. I wouldn't see a situation where we're restricting one development because another development is going on. If there's dust being produced on a site, that's a construction problem that they should be watering the site. It's too dry. It's too dry. And then we try and manage. I wouldn't say I anticipate any road closures in this, but lane reductions is what we would try and manage with them.
What about noise? I guess part of the concern I have, and this goes back to what Sloan talked about, you talked and bragged about a neighborhood feel, but then there's a barn coming down behind my backyard, and then a barn coming down in the neighborhood in front of me, which loses part of the appeal this neighborhood had.
I guess to that, we kind of thought only focusing something in the center, not, leaving it open, leaving the larger setbacks. Not a lot of these lots, a lot of the areas anymore have, 40 foot setbacks in their residential areas. They're cramming them in there. We kind of thought doing the duplexes around there, leaving it a more open feel, would keep it a little more of that. And to us, it was more the walkability, like we said, the ponds, that sort of thing that wasn't necessarily on this site that made it the feel we were looking for.
If I can speak for my fellow neighbors, I would say that this might not be fitting what the neighbors are looking for. Thanks for allowing us to ask questions.
Thank you, Megan. I've got Brady next, then Susan, Chris, Molly, and Terry. Brady, go ahead. You should be able to unmute.
And maybe I can interject. I know we're getting close to 7. I would hope I may push over a little bit, but I would like to try and see if we could move towards kind of wrapping up the meeting. I think we've been going at this for about an hour and a half, so.
All right. Let's move to Susan. Susan, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I guess I have two questions. The first one is probably directed towards you, Ryan. What is the property currently zoned? And I apologize if I missed that at the beginning of the meeting.
That's okay. Property is currently zoned ID, which is called Interim Development District. It's meant to be a holding pattern zoning until a rezoning or something like that comes through. It allows for a limited number of uses such as churches, schools, farms, those types of things. I think properties that are in the city, large properties that we have are typically zoned ID because we typically just designate that when a property comes in. So this was the original farmstead, I believe. So it's probably had an ag type zoning for quite some time. And as Fox Run developed around it, it was given a residential zoning and developed. And so for this to be developed as something else other than those limited number of uses that I mentioned, it needs a rezoning.
So I guess a follow-up question to that, if this proposal weren't to go through and all the other economic factors fell into place, there would be no rezoning, no community meetings to put in a church or some other large building of that nature. It would just more or less go through.
You're correct. If they had a use that was permitted in the underlying district, which was, say, for instance, like a church, I'd probably be the more relevant. I think there's a church on North Jones Boulevard that's in the ID district. That's where the community pantry is.
Yes.
They wouldn't need to go through a rezoning. There is still a public process. And that's just called preliminary site plan approval. That does go through planning commission and city council. We typically don't go through this type of neighborhood meeting type exercise for something like that. It's really done at a staff level to ensure that the plan they provided meets on a preliminary basis code requirements.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then Corey and Melissa, you've said you have some experience building in North Liberty. Would you say you have a good relationship with the city of North Liberty with building codes and knowledge around that? How would you classify that relationship?
I would say we have a good relationship with the city as far as understanding the building codes and understanding what the city's wants and needs are. We've been around the city for a long, long time.
All right, let's move to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Let's move to Chris. Then I've got Molly and Terry.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, kind of both for the city and for Corey and Melissa. So first with Corey and Melissa, I know you've referenced the need for the type of housing. I guess when I think of, yes, North Liberty doesn't necessarily have that, but if you look at Coralville, Iowa City, and those areas, are those properties that are similar at capacity, or are they struggling to fill? And then I kind of got lost on your comment about like when you're talking about the rental and the gardens and things like that. So would the duplex properties have usage of the yard or no? And then you can go ahead and then I'll ask the city questions. Sure. So yes, our study, it gets very complicated into this, and quite frankly, even when Mark will talk, sometimes I don't understand. But a lot of it is as far as communities. So Solon, Tiffin, North Liberty, Swisher, Shreveville, these are all considered similar communities. There are a lot of people that don't want to move into Iowa City, Coralville, and the city proper. But yes, those facilities, they're not at max capacity, but a lot of them do have wait lists. And it's not necessarily a dire wait list, but you go ahead and you get on that wait list when you know you're going to transition into there if it's a facility that you know you're going to want. Oh shoot, I forgot your second question. What was that? I kind of got lost on your comments about when you were talking about the rental and like the gardens and the yes, absolutely, use of the yards. Yes, you can put gardens in, the plants, all of that. So yes, use of the yards.
So whether it's a rental or a purchase, that
Well,
access would be.
yes, and like I said, I confuse everybody by saying rental. It's not that we are going to start a management company and rent these out. It is more of a, either we sell them straight off and establish an homeowners association, or we establish a co-op type of thing where you kind of buy into it versus owning it outright. And that's the co-ops get very complicated.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And then
Thank you.
for the city, I know we've talked a few times on traffic flow, but yeah, definitely I would encourage coming out there. I mean, there are times of the day where the traffic is backed up nearly to this property. So on a 2-lane road with no shoulder, no ditch, I mean, accidents happen, and then where does the traffic divert to? And it already is an issue, let alone putting that number of additional cars out there. So I know there's probably not really an answer for that, because I know you said you would conduct a study of some sort. So, and then what about thoughts as far as the city? And I know there's discussion about like needing more parks in North Liberty and a park space. I know there is a current park space, but a larger park space with the size of the community that it is. And I know that's not a CJ construction thing, but it would be more of a city thing when there's discussion of putting a park in some development area that's not far from here. And then I know you referenced, Ryan, the development by Tin Roofs being the most similar, I guess, development in your time and being in North Liberty, which that property does seem to fit with like the statements in the comprehensive plan for the city, as far as concentrating that high density apartment type housing in proximity with areas that offer those supportive services and are more commercial and recreational facilities. It seems like a lot of times those things are in access to people that maybe want to walk places and they don't want to be far enough that they have to drive. And I'm guessing that's maybe where that piece of the comprehensive plan evolved from.
Well, first of all, thank you for reading the comp plan and familiarizing yourself with it. You have no idea how somebody that I appreciate that. I got kind of lost on the. I mean, there's just a whole level of analysis from the city's perspective that has to go into this, and so, you know, I've talked to a few folks, and I can appreciate that. You know, you're kind of trying to get a read of how the city's going to react to this. I promise you that it hasn't been done yet. I promise you I'm going to be looking, you know, at our approved policies and what our current comprehensive plan recommends as far as placement and things like that. And so we just haven't gotten too far into that process. So, and then I'm sorry, I just forgot the first part of your question for the city's perspective. Oh, park space. Thank you.
Park space, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we do have a parks plan. It's on our website. So if you Google North Liberty Planning, you'll see the adopted parks plan. Right now, we have some areas in the city that we just don't have this area designated as, we kind of have a needs based on where population is, because we want folks to have, you know, a park near, you know, close by that they can enjoy. So kind of with the rings based on the population density that we have, we don't identify this property as being within that ring. I can tell you, you know, with the acquisition of the Ranchaw House on Penn and the investments made to that, we have Centennial Park that we're looking to do additional programming in. On the council's agenda, we talked about acquisition of a 40-acre park between Future Jones and 965, kind of across from the McDonald's. So we have been looking at kind of larger regional parks. So it's not identified in any council goal or any planning document that this property in particular has been identified for park space. From a city funding standpoint, it's an expensive piece of property, and if it needed to be cleared for park space, you have that additional cost for demolition. So that's an expensive one for the taxpayers. But currently, just not identified doesn't mean it can't be in the future if council decides that, you know, this is a priority for us to be, you know, for park space. But there's nothing for us to react to move forward for acquisition of that property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to go to Molly, and then we've got Terry. Go ahead, Molly.
Hi, I was just wondering, do you have another, and my apologies if you had mentioned this earlier, another similar neighborhood where they have built high density housing in an existing residential space that we could possibly like review or just see how it's played out? I know you've done some research. I didn't know if there are different areas, not necessarily in Iowa, just anywhere that did some similar action, put this type of housing into an established residential area.
I'm not being facetious here, but with the power of the internet, I'm confident that I could find one.
Yeah, and I was just with the builders if they had researched in that aspect to say, oh wow, this worked over here. This is something that as they were looking for ideas and figuring out what is the best way to utilize the space with this community that they're targeting. Okay, I'll take silence as a no.
Sorry, I couldn't.
That's
the
okay.
mute bar doesn't always come up. I have to roll the mouse around a few times to find it. No, so I mean, Keystone is not in a residential area. It is close to one. I've got some friends that live in that area. They were very nervous about traffic and all of that. Our thing is pretty unique, and that's the interesting part is it's not one. We are going to have people traveling. We want people vested in the neighborhood and that sort of thing. So ours is a little different. There really isn't anything I would compare to this.
Okay. And then my other question, and I didn't see it on the map, but my eyes are somewhat challenged at this point. But you'd mentioned a pickleball court. So how many pickleball courts are you guys expecting to put in? And whereabouts are those going to be located? If you could just refresh or review that.
So we're talking about putting a couple courts in. There'll be 2 on the south side of the pool, and then we're talking about maybe putting 1 or 2 on the inside, so that there's still activity and people can still have fun during the winter times.
Okay, so those would be indoor or outdoor?
There'll be 2 out and then 2 in is what we were thinking, but that plan hasn't fully developed yet on that side of it.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering, with friends who live close to pickleball courts that have been put in, not necessarily in this market, the sound. And I would just, as you look at that, just to invest in different sound barriers and whatnot for those neighbors that are close there. And even if I'm looking at it to where you identify those people in those duplexes, that sound could be pretty significant. So just wanted to get more information about that. That's all I had. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. I've got Terry next. Terry, go ahead. Terry, you should be able to unmute. All right, let's move to Angie. Angie, I've got you. You should be able to unmute. Go ahead. We're going to try Brady again. Brady, can you unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. I do have a few questions for the developer. Can you briefly discuss your experiencing in developing a community of this size or any community at all? It's obviously a very 70 units is a significant sort of community to develop.
Sorry about that. Again, we're trying to find the mute button. Over the years, I've done a lot of multi-story complexes. I have developments all over the place in the Midwest, and then out in Western Kansas, we got another development that's a high-density development where we've done multiple phasing into things. We're very familiar with it. I guess I'm kind of lost direction on what specifics you were asking me about it, but we have developed these type of places in residential areas.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Has financing been secured for the project? Obviously, we're in a an odd kind of financing period with the interest rates doing what they are, and just obviously we don't want to get this thing rezoned and then have the plug pulled on a project like this.
Yes, financing is not an issue.
You mentioned meals very briefly. Is a commercial kitchen planned on the premises?
There is a commercial kitchen that has been proposed in it. We're still working through those details on that whole, as far as services and different things like that go with the complex.
No real specifics there. Okay. I guess sort of a question for Ryan. Do you have a plan to run a kind of formal cost benefit analysis on this? I understand how this benefits the developer. I understand how it benefits the city. You've got a lot of tax revenue without the costs of kids, right? But I don't understand how this benefits. In many respects, this is putting a commercial property within a residential neighborhood. I know it maybe not specifically, but I want to understand how this benefits the existing community. To me, it seems like it's just creating a new community within the community, and the existing community is bearing all of the costs. Thank you.
I'm not going to answer the question just because I think you made a statement, and I think you have a valid point. I mean, I don't think we look at things purely from a cost benefit analysis, meaning that a proposed use like this would generate higher taxes and therefore it should go here. That's not the type of analysis we would perform. We would perform an analysis of, is the proposed development compatible with the surrounding area, and we have a couple of criteria for what zoning should get approved. So, does it generate more tax money from the city's perspective? And I think that's where you're going from that. Doesn't play into the consideration of should the zoning get approved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brady. We've got two folks. I'm going to go Terry first. Terry should be able to unmute and ask your question. There we go.
Finally figured out how to do it. Sorry about that. So just a curiosity question. As far as, I think it was the condos you guys were talking about, what made you decide for a 4-level?
There we go.
All right, sorry about that. So the 4th level is, it just it led us to larger units, basically, instead of just a 1-bedroom, real small unit. So it gives it more feel, more room for the 55 and older people to live in, and to have family members over if they come to visit. So you're not crammed into one small space. That was the reasoning before that.
Okay, so.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You got your, I guess, 4 stories. Maybe that's how I should have asked it, where it's 4 stories tall. What was the decision maker as far as making it 4 stories tall versus like maybe 3 stories, or, I don't know how tall the barn is, but it's just a curiosity question.
So yeah, so the unit is actually, I believe it's the barn that's out there is taller than the building itself is, as far as the elevation goes. And going 4 stories, it just gave us that tiered look. That way, I don't know, we just felt it fit the units sizes that we were trying to get to. So like when we had a square box, it looked ugly, so we tiered it to tear it down. And as we were doing that, it allowed us to create different shapes and different sizes of units. And by going to 4 stories, it allowed that access for it.
So Ryan, could you go back to the slide of that exterior elevation of the building? It's not the entire building is 4 stories. That's what Corey's talking about, tiered down, like on the sides. couple units stick up a little bit more. It just kind of give it some dimension instead of you drive by and it's a square box condo.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. And then Crystal, you're our last one for the evening. Go ahead and ask your question. And then I think we'll wrap up.
So I think Brady touched base on this earlier, but I think as a neighborhood, we are having trouble getting on board with this proposal because there hasn't been any kind of discussion about how this benefits us as an existing community. And we see the benefit to the 55-year-old plus, and we see what you guys are trying to do, but we would just like you to speak to something that is going to benefit us so that we can help support you and be the good neighbors that, you know, you've called us here to be.
Part of our discussions in this, which is why we've talked about a co-op versus selling outright and homeowners association, is providing to you guys the facilities of the pool, of the pickleball. It's a fine line, because then if we open the pool up, and I am not against kids, I have kids. I'm just saying if we open it up to that, does it change the dynamic, the pickleball, that sort of thing, the workout facility that is inside of there. It's all part of the dynamic and we're trying to figure out, which is why I love these neighborhood meetings to find out what you guys want or need. We've talked about earlier, it was discussed, the detention and the water runoff is not fantastic. So would that potentially help alleviate maybe some soggy backyards? We would hope so. Does that affect everybody? No, it doesn't. It's only going to be the neighboring properties. Would we bring tax base? Yes. Does that mean the city can afford some more things? Potentially. We can't control how that would be spent. So I would love to hear how that's the point of this meeting. How could we potentially help you as well?
Okay, so I'm going to just wrap it up with public comment. I did get an email and just wanted me to summarize some comments. There's no perfect answer for the property, as the bank that owns it has a price very high and it wasn't feasible for buyers to buy it and put single family homes on it. And the city has other plans for park expansion. I think this proposal sounds like a good idea. We actually looked at purchasing the property to use it for something, although smaller scale. The design incorporates single level duplexes. I don't think this takes away from the townhome feeling at all. Aging in place, to stay closer to neighborhoods, family is a wonderful idea. So just to summarize, this person's in favor. Just in kind of wrapping up, I'm just going to provide you with my contact information one more time. I've seen some emails during the meeting. I would like to appreciate my colleague Nick for helping me manage this with such a large group. I thought it went pretty well. We will get a list of all the emails if you signed up, and I'll kind of keep you updated as we move through this process about what the next steps are, just so you don't have to kind of keep thinking like what's going on. But as I mentioned, you're always welcome to reach out to me. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. I'd like to thank the applicants. I'd like to express my sincerest appreciation that everybody was cordial and polite, and I really appreciate that about this community, sincerely. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody again and have a good evening.